Texas Monthly did a big story, and it turns out that Hispanic voters in South Texas, if you force them to identify as a race as opposed to an ethnicity, they identify as white. And they're embracing what the media views as whiteness, which is they're voting Republican. So at a time, Democrats thought demography was destiny and more Hispanic voters would make South Texas Democrat. It turns out more Hispanic voters is making South Texas more Republican. Well, now there's this from, of all places, NBC News. Here's the headline. Democrats warn of canary in the coal mine for Latino voters in California recall. Subtitle, while California Latinos voted to keep Governor Gavin Newsom in office, they did so by a smaller margin than Democrats have won in the past. California Governor Gavin Newsom trounced the effort to remove him from office in Tuesday's recall election, but the rosy result may obscure an erosion of support among Latino voters for Democrats that has some in the party worried about the future. Donald Trump got a historic number of Latino votes in 2020, and you can claim it was because of this or because of that, but it's not like Larry Elder broke through for these folks. There's something else going on, says Michael Trujillo, a Democratic strategist based in Los Angeles, referring to the leading Republican candidate in the failed recall attempt. The former president made inroads with Latino voters in places like South Florida and the Rio Grande Valley in Texas last year. But many Democrats chalked up those results to the idiosyncrasies of the Latino population in those areas, Trump's unique persona, or wrinkles of holding an election during a pandemic. But in the first real-world test since the 2020 election, some data from California suggests the issue may be more widespread, a potential troubling sign for Democrats ahead of the 2022 midterms, when Latino voters will play a major role in the battle for the House in places like California. Democrats have long warned that they are taking support among minorities, including Black and Hispanic voters, for granted, assuming they will support liberals without doing enough work to win their backing. We're seeing something happen in blue state California, where a certain segment of the Latino population is trending in the wrong direction, Trujillo says. California Latino voters sided with Newsom and against the recall 60-40, according to the NBC News exit poll, a slightly smaller margin than Newsom and other Democrats have won in the past in California, especially among Latino men, and nearly identical to the 59-41 split among white voters. By contrast, Black voters broke 83-17 in favor of Newsom, and Asian Americans backed the governor 64-36. In being elected governor 3 years ago, Newsom won 64% of the Latino vote. Both whites and Latinos saw a larger gender gap, with Latina women more likely to side with Newsom by 19 points, and white women with the governor by 16 points. Still, Dorian Cowell, the director of civic engagement research at the nonpartisan Naleo Education Fund, the offshoot of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, cautioned against reading too much into the exit polls. Yeah, listen, exit polls are far more accurate than public opinion polling because exit polling itself is based on the actual people who are actually voting. They sample a whole lot of them. They keep track of the percentage of white, Black, Hispanic, Asian people who vote. They adjust the proportions of the exit polling statistically, so you get a pretty representative snapshot of the opinions of the people who actually turned out to vote. Everyone historically pays attention to the exit voting. And I'm saying all the exit voting. You know, you have early exits, midday exits, late day exits. You can't pay attention to any one of those because they're not adjusted statistically. You have to pay attention to the composite of the exit results, where they combine the ones they took in the morning, the ones they took in the middle of the day, and the ones they took in the evening. And it looks like Latino voters, even in California, are drifting away from the Democrats. Now, not at such an alarming rate as they are in places like Colorado and in Texas and in Florida, but they are. And it presents a problem for the Democrats. And I have a theory on this. It is different from what the media would have you believe. To summarize what the media is interpreting the Latino drift away from Democrats as, they interpret it as Democrats playing racial demographic politics are forcing people to pick and be defined by their races. Latino voters choose to be identified ethnically as Hispanic or Latino, racially as white people. And as a result, they are identifying with white people, and white people vote Republican, and so they are voting Republican. That's the way the media processes this. I think it's different. Brian Kemp is the governor of Georgia. He won 39% of the Hispanic vote in 2018 against Stacey Abrams. If Brian Kemp in Georgia gets up to about 45% of the Latino Hispanic vote in Georgia in 2022, Democrats aren't going to be able to beat him in a close election. David Perdue, U.S. Senator from Georgia, who lost the runoff by about 90,000 votes to John Ossoff, he got about 40%, 40 to 42% of the Hispanic vote in Georgia. Why? Donald Trump, of course, got a significant chunk. Ron DeSantis got a significant chunk. Greg Abbott got a significant chunk in Texas in the last go-round. And then this last time, the white Republican congressional candidates in South Texas got a good chunk of Latino voters. What are they doing differently? Well, I would submit to you that Latino voters historically are immigrants to this country. Surprise. And as immigrants to the United States, they are focused on America and being an American. So when you have Democratic candidates who try to treat them as Latino voters, you're treating them as something other than an American voter. They want desperately to have the American dream. Here come Democrats telling them that they're oppressed by white people and they can't have the American dream. And meanwhile, the Latino voters are thinking, I can have the American dream. Also, it's impolite and politically incorrect to talk about it, but there actually is a significant, in parts of this country, strain of racism and racial dynamics between black and Hispanic voters. And black voters are entrenched within the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party largely pays more attention to them than to Hispanic voters. And the Hispanic voters in this country, they'd like a political party to pay attention to them, but not as Hispanic voters, as Americans. Republicans do a terrible job with their outreach. In Georgia, occasionally the Georgia Republican Party will hire someone to do Hispanic outreach, and it's some white dude in his 20s who learned Spanish from Rosetta Stone and shows up and says, "Hola, mi amigos." Nobody wants to pay attention to that guy. Just treat them like Americans. And what you do is in some cases, you do respect their differences. In some cases, English is a second language to them. So you go out, you speak to them in Spanish. Que horror, you can't do that. Yeah, actually, you should. Reach them where they're at. Reach them in their life. But you're not talking to them in Spanish about their issues as Hispanic immigrants. You're talking to them about, well, their moms, their dads, their doctors, their day laborers, their blue-collar workers. They got to pay taxes. They're culturally conservative. They don't like the transgender agenda that the left is pushing in their kids' schools. Overwhelmingly, they go to public schools. The public schools are failing to give them an education and are instead indoctrinating them. You talk to them about those issues. You talk to them about jobs. You talk to them about crime and safety. And guess what? They resonate. That was the secret of what Donald Trump did. Donald Trump did not go talk to Hispanic voters as Hispanic voters. He didn't even talk to them in Spanish. They did some Spanish PR issues. They did some targeting. They did some Spanish language mail pieces. But by and large, Donald Trump just talked to these people as Americans, as people who were hard workers, as people who needed a job, as people who saw loved ones go to jail. And it worked for him. And the Democrats, meanwhile, they're like, well, these people, they come from countries with heavy-handed dictators. They're fleeing. They kind of like that heavy-handed. There's literally the New York Times trying to explain why Hispanic voters were flirting with Donald Trump was, well, they come from, they're fleeing countries with dictators, charismatic dictators. They kind of like a charismatic dictator. No, they're fleeing from that person. That was actually, same with young black men flirting with Donald Trump as well, toxic masculinity and rap music. There was an actual analysis of the New York Times. It wasn't true. Turns out they wanted jobs. Donald Trump, with his criminal justice reform, got a lot of young black men out of prison. They liked him that he got them out of jail and did an economy that he helped an economy that gave them jobs. They like this. The more Democrats play identity politics with the races, the worse off they're going to be. And they're so addicted to it, they can't help it. They can't stop it. And that actually helps Republicans. And we're seeing it in places like, of all places, California, Texas, Florida, Colorado, and the like. So keep on playing identity politics, Democrats. Amazing what happens when you divide up people by the color of their skin. They think you're racist and don't like you.